Good afternoon or evening. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Hey, before we start, I'd like to encourage people to visit my web page at michaelcross.net and also visit my YouTube station, well, at Michael Cross. And it's the one that says, / freedom from conscience. And you'll find a lot of our past shows recorded there for your convenience. Actually, the last year and a half's worth of shows are there. Some really interesting guests and so forth. Anyway, what I'd like to deal with tonight is to answer the question, is America a capitalist nation or is it a free enterprise nation? Now, I'll bet you're wondering, wait a minute, what's the difference? Aren't you saying just the same thing, but just using different words? Actually, no. They do involve capital, meaning money. Okay? But with free enterprise, there is an assumption that it's a level playing field, that you have competition, that you have the interaction between supply and demand to give an equilibrium of price or the true price of products. You have a situation in which new innovations can come in and maybe large, old corporations fade away like the dinosaurs. That is free enterprise. Okay? The idea that everyone from someone sets up a lemonade stand or goes out and when they're 8 years old and asks if they can mow the neighbor's lawn or wash their car, everyone to the CEO living in some nice place like New York City in a penthouse apartment. That is free enterprise. Capitalism also involves the idea that money or rules ultimately. And generally, it means too that you have corporations. Most of the money generated in the economy is not by government, but it's more corporate or small businesses and so forth. It can mean that. But here's the distinction. Capitalism can also involve an idea where we have oligopolies and monopolies. It's still a private economy, but ultimately, it's not the free system that we think of when we think of free enterprise. Now, before I go on, I love using analogies. I really love to use analogies. And one of the analogies I would like to use tonight to illustrate where our economy is at today is the analogy of a forest. Now, think about some barren land. I don't know how it got barren, but it's barren. Okay? There's no trees on it. But a lot of pine seeds fall on this barren piece of land. Let's say it's at least 10, 20 acres, a small tract of land. But the trees start growing, and other seeds blow in as well, and so you have seedlings of different sizes. All right? Now, anyone that understands photosynthesis knows maybe back up a little bit for some people who graduated science classes in many parts of the United States. Photosynthesis basically means that you have the conversion of carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight into usable sugars for the plant, including trees. Of course, there's interaction with the vital nutrients that are needed for the building blocks of that tree, and those come in through the roots and so forth. Notice I said carbon dioxide. Oh my gosh, isn't carbon dioxide a dangerous gas according to, the Al Gore type people? Actually, no. We breathe in oxygen. We breathe out carbon dioxide. The plants breathe in carbon dioxide and send out oxygen. It's a pretty nice symbiotic relationship there. And it's existed for a very long time. But anyway, I don't want to talk about CO2 emissions and so forth. What I want to talk about is free enterprise, capitalism, and trees. Okay, you give this forest a while, and ultimately the trees that are the fastest growing will have an advantage. And you know why that is? Because there's a limited amount of resources for those trees. And by resources, I mean land and sunlight. Now you're thinking, well, wait, the sun's unlimited pretty much. Well, not really. Not to that individual tree. Because if another tree grows up faster than it does, then it shades that tree and it doesn't grow as well. And so then you get a difference in growth patterns in which if that little tree that didn't grow as fast as a big tree is lucky, it might just be able to get enough sunlight to grow, but very slowly. Now, in many cases, there's enough sunlight coming through that even some small trees continue the process of growth. In fact, as the bigger trees start producing pine cones themselves and those drop on the ground, then that supplies new potential for trees. And so in a fairly young forest that's not been touched by insects or man or whatever, you should have a variety of trees growing there. Some large, some medium, some small. And this is how the economy works. Now I'll come back in just a moment to describe how it doesn't work. This is how the economy works. In theory, most people's idea of free enterprise is that given time, resources will be allocated based on, well, demand in the society, but also those who supply it and can supply it better and cheaper. Now, in theory, some businesses will grow faster and they will grow bigger. They may start off as a ma and pa store, restaurant or whatever, but if they're really successful, they can branch out and, wind up maybe a national chain or a franchise or whatever. But in theory, then any company can grow to be a large corporation, just like any of those trees that are growing. They came from large trees and they have the genetic potential of growing into large trees. Now, under this situation, though, the trees that do get bigger, faster, do have an advantage. They get more sunlight. And you could say maybe that's, a large corporation has the ability to reach more people. More people are aware of the product, its quality, and therefore will buy the product. It's really simple. And there's other the medium-sized trees, they find their little niches. There's a little bit of light coming through at this one spot. They'll even bend towards that light. And the small ones, well, they're fighting, but they can still live too. And they might actually still be able to grow, although their chances of getting much bigger than like the size of Christmas trees might be somewhat limited, especially since they're competing against each other as well. Okay? Now, in theory, then, maybe some of the small and medium trees might, depending on circumstances, might make it to be large. Now, the thing is, that is implying a young forest. Now, let's pretend that forest goes longer. And the larger trees send out more branches and they start cutting off the sunlight that reaches the bottom. Well, under that circumstance, you might wind up with all those young seedlings either never even being able to germinate in the first place, or if they do take root, they don't have as much chance of survival, and most of them will die. In fact, if you go into an old-growth forest, you will generally find very, very few, if any, young trees amongst the old trees. Now, in nature, there's a variety of things that can happen to open things up, just like there are in the economy. In the economy, we have booms and busts, at least traditionally. We had, times when things would get really good and then, get really heated up and then it would collapse. And then it would build itself back up again like a roller coaster and then it would collapse. Okay? I mean, that's the way things were like in the 19th century. up until like the early part of the 20th century. Up and down, up and down, up and down. And in your lifetime, you went through a whole bunch of these. So maybe one point where you're able to buy your house when it was down, but you happen to have a job. Other times when you might lose your home and have to live somewhere else because the economy goes down and you didn't have a job. So there's all kinds of things that can happen. And corporations that were large might suffer as well. And some of those medium corporations might take their place. Now, here's the thing though. In a forest, you can have a situation in which, let's say you can have a forest fire that would burn the trees down. And maybe the younger trees would have a chance to then sprout and grow. And they'd be able to withstand the damages. The bigger ones would maybe have more dead bark on them and be engulfed and just die. But now let's say you've got a good forest ranger that comes along. And the forest ranger, because this is a really popular forest, decides that we have to do everything we can to make sure that there's no fire. Maybe the forest ranger is akin to like our central banks and, Federal Reserve and other, entities that try to stabilize the economy. So it's never a boom or bust. It's just kind of a little up, a little down, little up, little down. Managed ones. Of course, that benefits who? The big guys. And in this case, let's say if you have that situation and those trees get big, they're just sitting there and nothing's taking place. No new growth is taking place. If you go down on a trail, it's covered with moss and mushrooms and things like that. Okay? And, ironically, when it comes to older trees, they don't produce as much oxygen per acre as younger trees that are growing and they have a strong metabolism. These are older trees, kind of like, they're like, walruses. They just kind of sit there and try to conserve their energy. Now, the thing is that our economy, because we do have this kind of planning, first of all, this let's manage booms and busts. Let's keep things steady so that things just don't get out of hand. You know who that benefits ultimately? Not the little guys starting out, but the large corporations. The whole, even beyond the whole too big to fail. Your bank has made lots of lousy subprime bets and stuff like that. Let's go ahead and use the taxpayers' money and then let you go, let you reestablish yourself. And then we don't charge interest. So they pay it all back ultimately, and they get stimulus money. And then then that stimulus money, they have a choice. They can lend it out to little guys and then take a risk that, maybe they'll default on their mortgage or their business might not make it. Or what they could do is just start taking this money and they could start investing it themselves in various ventures. And this is kind of like what's going on now, isn't it? You hear these statistics. The stock market's doing great. Things are great. Money's being generated. But you know what? It's just like with that forest. It's not for the little guys. Those big trees, they're doing really, really well. They're doing great. But, from the little tree's perspective, I'm dying, I'm gasping for air. Or in this case, carbon dioxide. And they're not able to live. Now, in our economy, we take it a step further than that even. All right? Think if the forest ranger starts noticing little gaps here and there, and there's trees starting to grow that could threaten these big old trees eventually. So our nice forest ranger goes out there and sprays some poison on them, or cuts them down, or does any number of things, because we want to make that a really nice picnic area that people can go and enjoy that little old growth forest. Now, this is akin to government regulation. Think about how the government takes money. They take tax money and so forth. And we would think that they would be economically neutral in things. But they're not. We've been on a war economy ever since World War II. Look it up. I mean, essentially what? America's not been in war since 1776 for like a 20-year period that there's been no wars. But since World War II, it's big time. Really, really big time. Whereas there might have been skirmishes between the cavalry and Indians back in the 1870s, which would have counted for war. The thing is nowadays, it's big, massive, explosions and weapons and so forth. And the thing is, these weapons cost a freaking lot of money. Okay? Cruise missiles like $1 million. So think about those pictures you saw when our geniuses in Washington, D.C., and also the ones in London and Paris too, decided, let's take Gaddafi out. And you saw all those big cruise missiles, and maybe there was a Freudian thing, guys kind of seeing those big missiles going off, and it's like, yeah, man, wow. And, people like to see things go boom. Okay, they may be even anti-war, but they still like to see the footage of things going boom. Fireworks on the ground, not realizing when all those bombs go off, they're killing people each time one of those goes off, okay? They don't evacuate a building, then they blow it up. No, these are killing people. But the thing is, they're very expensive. So they're costing the taxpayers a great deal of money. Now, where do they buy these bombs from? Okay, cruise missiles are not something that you at a hardware store can say, I can make a really nice cruise missile and I can sell it to the government for half the price that one big corporation's selling it for. Or, let's take it another step. I read an article that said, well, drones are the big business right now. People are really competing to turn out really nice drones. Well, you know what? Maybe your hardware store guy also has a degree in physics and engineering. And, well, you get the point. He's not going to be able to make a drone that's going to compete with the big guys. The other one's not going to be able to make a cruise missile that's going to compete with any of the defense manufacturers. And even if they could, we can bet that those big defense contractors would go just like our forest ranger, kind of keeping the little trees down. The big corporations go to the Senate and the Congress, and they wine and dine them and a variety of other things that I'm sure that, the way it's depicted on TV is not too far out of the norm. So, Senator so-and-so, he's all Mr. Peace, and, maybe in the 60s he was a peace activist and marching against the war in Vietnam, but now he represents an area that makes a lot of money off, I don't know, cruise missiles or something, or drones. He or she is going to vote for those appropriations. And they're meeting with these lobbyists who are saying, we need more of this. Oh, we need this. Hey, maybe we need to find a way to have better autonomous robots. Terminator wasn't such a bad thing after all. And we can have this kind of a competition. It's no longer a space race, which is actually unfortunate. I would actually love it if China and Russia were competing against Europe and they were competing against the United States to see who could produce the best space stations or moon colonies or exploration, because then that would be fantastic. It would be something we could all benefit from ultimately. But no, instead we have all of our technology being used, the research grants and so forth are going to build better technology, better surveillance systems, then better firewalls around those. Better drones, better robots, better everything. And of course, these are multi-billion-dollar projects. Many of these companies did not even exist. But you know what? Back around 20 years ago. But after 9/11 and so forth, now it's booming because we need to protect the American people from all those threats and all those things that can happen. And, right. Okay. So we need to start a whole bunch of wars and really stir things up. That's the best way to do it. I want to protect my family. We go on a picnic, and I want to protect my family from hornets. Okay? Where I live, when you have a hot summer, you got hornets all over the freaking place. Hornets are actually beneficial creatures, though. They eat bugs and so forth. But they can be very nasty when they go after your food, and then you try to swish them away. They get angry, and they nail you. A hornet bite is not fun at all. Okay. It's like a bee on steroids and crack at the same time. But the thing is that what is the American foreign policy right now? It's akin to the guy going out, maybe he's, next to the forest I was talking about, and takes his family on a picnic and then decides, hey, you know what would be really cool to do? I see a hornet's nest over there and over there and over there and over there. Now, they're not bothering us right now, but I got some firecrackers. I'm going to stick the firecrackers into the hornet's nest and blow them up, and then I'm going to come down and we're going to eat them. And then the hornets just start flying like crazy, woo, all over, and, kids are screaming because they're getting bitten and stuff like that. And Dad's like, something should be done about these hornets, and, he's blaming the hornets when he's the one that went out and stuck the firecrackers into their nest, blew it up, and really got things going. Hey, that's American foreign policy. There's another analogy. I love analogies. Anyway, but when it comes back to those big trees, well, ultimately, government will do another thing besides just favoring the large corporations, which I will note that if you read Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations, which is like he and John Locke together are sort of like the cornerstone of the free enterprise, free system that we envision, at least. I don't know if it's there anymore, but it's what we want. Well, the thing is, he put down things like guilds. And these were, like when all the barbers would get together and say, let's go down to the local magistrate and tell them that there has to be a special barber's tax. And they have to have a certain amount of education at a barber's school. And this was something that Smith condemned because he felt this was allowing the people that were already established to use their power to keep competition down and therefore keep prices up for barbers' services or whatever services. And this essentially, while it's not, unions, I don't think are really, as powerful as they used to be, except for the public sector unions. A lot of the private sector employees have their jobs are now in East Beijing. They're no longer in places like Detroit and places like Baltimore and so forth. But the government goes in and sets up rules that make it difficult, even more difficult than it was, for the small corporations to become large corporations and the small businesses to become small corporations. They make it difficult. And it's often the large corporations acting just like the guilds that Adam Smith condemned. They will go to the government and say, you know what, maybe we need a special, I don't know, maybe we should start implementing a national sales tax on items that are bought off the internet. Well, these big corporations think, wait, that's going to cost them money too. Well, yeah, but it's kind of like with Saudi Arabia and the oil thing. The Saudis are losing money right now. Well, they're making money, but not as much as they were because their oil is very easy to get at. And so they're pumping it like crazy, which has flooded the market right now, and the oil prices are low. That means, though, that the small operators and the people who are trying to extract oil in hard-to-get places where it's going to be more expensive to get it, well, they're not going to make a profit. So therefore, Saudis are knocking them out of business, ultimately. And maybe in 5 years, they'll just start raising lowering how much they're pumping and raise the price again. And after that, after they've wiped out a lot of the small operators in competition, and it might take 20 years for them to recover, for people to start over again. But this is the thing. Regulations, often pollution regulations, you get rid of 99% of the pollution, but maybe, going by the law of diminishing returns, which I won't really go into a lot of detail here. It's just that the more you want to do something, the less you get back for each amount of unit of effort or money you put into it. So maybe it costs you X amount of dollars to be able to get rid of 99% of all the pollution that comes out of a coal-based electrical facility. But to get it to 99.5, it might cost you 3 times more money than it costs to get it up to 99. Well, then the large corporations that are in this, well, they just go and say, hey, maybe let's save the world. Let's have it 99.5%. They can afford it. They can pay the extra, and especially when all the little guys go out of business. And then they want, because the government actually closes them down for violating pollution regulations. And then the big guy corners the market. All right. It winds up in charge. This is like third world situation in the United States nowadays. It's like when down in Central America, where some big rich land conglomerate goes in, buys up all the little guys' properties, then makes it one giant coffee plantation. Well, now a little guy, at first he thought he was making some pretty good money selling his land, but now his money runs out. And instead of having his little plot of land where he had a few coffee trees and could supplement his income and he could raise pigs and corn and stuff and feed his family, now he's a worker picking beans in a big giant transnationally owned agricultural facility. And he's not going to make much money doing that. And the money he does make, he has to go out and buy all the stuff that normally he used to raise on his own. And you wonder why they're all jumping on trains and trying to go up through Mexico and come to the United States. A lot of it's because you had large corporations go in there and actually encourage these kinds of liberalization of land laws that used to exist in many of these countries. I mean, in the 50s, people used to protest about the large banana plantations and stuff having such a monopoly in a country. Well, it's worse now. It really is. But now you got international banking institutions and so forth all playing with the game too and making it even harder for the little guy. This is not free enterprise, but it is capitalism. Okay? It's still based on money. It's still privately generated revenue. But is it free? Well, I mean, the media, almost all of our media is owned by 6 corporations. And those corporations don't just own TV networks. They own all kinds of production facilities, publishing firms, and other things that aren't even maybe associated with communications. But the thing is that I don't know if you can really say, if we didn't have the internet, I don't think we'd really have that much free communication nowadays. I mean, you'd be just getting it from these conglomerates that have gotten together. Now, it's true, in a capitalist system, you had dozens of companies back in like 1980, and they all merge. I use the analogy sometimes like when you're watching Terminator 3 and the T-1000 gets shattered after he gets all frozen, and then he starts coming back. All the little gooey nano, whatever it is, come back together, and he comes back to life. But the thing is that that's just how capitalism works. But in theory, then other things should come and start competing. Now, the internet has, but one wonders how much pressure is being put on by corporations that would like to see an end to this Wild West situation that exists on the internet. And I mean that in a positive way, not a negative. Sometimes people say Wild West when they're talking about gun control, and they want it to be taken in a negative way. But I'm saying it in a positive way. You can go on there and do whatever you want. You can go on there and talk about anything you want on the internet. But what happens when we start getting more and more regulations? That won't be the case. Then it's just like that forest ranger going out there and clipping down those little trees that are starting to compete with the big guys. And then he puts down fertilizer to help big guys even get bigger. But ultimately what will happen in that forest is it will get infected by bugs. It's going to happen. Or some point lightning strikes it and boom, it's gone. But without the diversity, you're back to nothing. And I think ultimately, if the economy collapses in the Western world, and we're so reliant on these giant corporations, and they're so intricate in their own infrastructure, to where if things get bad, they're not able to really manage in a more of an aggressive, I don't know, Walking Dead sort of economic scenario. Then what are you left with? Well, it might be left with the countries that were sort of, emerging. They might be the ones that come out on top. Whereas the countries that really just let their diversity go out the door will be on the bottom. Think about how much now is produced in China. Can America produce? What would happen if suddenly either the United States couldn't afford to buy these goods or China refused to sell them? Well, bye-bye. And the United States will be kind of in the same situation that, I don't know, maybe you find in the Latin American countries back in the 50s. Maybe being able to rely on agriculture or something to try to keep the economy going, even though everyone's expectations are set for first world. But yet the economy seems to be rushing to third world. Not that saying that there's no money, it's just that we're winding up with everything's being concentrated in those big trees or big corporations or the people that are dealing with finances, and they don't build anything new. They just reinvest in various commodities and other ventures, and that's how they make their money. So it's a game, but it ultimately doesn't put people to work. So I just wanted to say that again, when you hear these debates, when you hear these various debates going on, and you hear maybe a candidate that is kind of a libertarian, and he says we need to have more free enterprise, and then you hear more of an establishment, let's just keep doing everything we've been doing for the past 20 years type of guy, and he says we need to have a more, we need to really respect capitalism. Don't lose sight of the fact that maybe they are not just using the words interchangeably. And the guy that's talking about capitalism is totally positive. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to help those big corporations get bigger and bigger and bigger. And maybe it'll help the little guy a little bit. Who knows? And then the other guy is saying, well, we need to have more free enterprise. And he really means it. He really means that we need to have economic diversity. Because we don't have, it's going out the tube right now. It's dying. So anyway, that's all I wanted to deal with that particular issue this evening. I'd like to go into another topic right here. And that is basically that everything that we call art is ultimately propaganda. And what I'm going to focus on is the media. I wrote an article recently for my website. You can visit that at michaelcross.net and read it, but I'm going to elaborate on it right here. Now, the thing is, George Orwell is the one who said that all art is ultimately propaganda. And a lot of times people might look at that and they might think, well, now, wait a minute. How can you say a painting of, I don't know, a lake is in some way propaganda? Well, propaganda can be defined as something that changes our point of view. It elicits an emotional response. It gets us thinking and contemplating. Or it could be just something to persuade us. And so therefore, everything such as, everything such as a painting of a lake, or, as in the example I use in the article, photography, is ultimately propaganda. Because you're trying to communicate something. And you're doing it at somewhat of a subconscious level, which that's usually included as an element in propaganda. That you're changing someone's views in such a way that they're not really even critically thinking. They're emotionally thinking. Now, getting back to the article, I use an example there of photography, and then I'm going to tie this in to the actual media. And by media, I mean the whole thing. I mean newspapers, television, commercials, but also the news. Because ultimately, I don't see any real difference between a commercial for toothpaste and a regular network news program. I'll explain why later. Anyway, the thing is that let's just go with the example here. Let's say you have a photographer. The photographer is doing a photo shoot with a model, in a forest. Now, if the photographer wants to deal with like an esoteric message, the photographer can have the model, for instance, and just an example, dress in a dark robe and be out, in kind of a state of reflection. That would kind of have that feeling of contemplation and thinking of higher things. And you wouldn't even really need to explain that if you showed that photo to a group of people in a gallery and asked them, what is this saying? Now, of course, someone could be, the kind of people that think very concretely, that's a woman in a black robe in the forest. But most people would be thinking, oh, it's trying to convey this feeling or message because this is what I'm feeling. Now, in another case, you could have a model who is dressed in maybe some sort of Greek style white, I'm not going to really say robe, but kind of the skirt type thing that we associate with when people are trying to like reenact a Greek play or something. And if she's out like that and she's got this kind of strength pose, like looking out at the landscape, like she's dominating it, then again, people are going to see that. Same model, different dress, different pose, different scenery in the background. But still, it's the same photographer, same model. And we can even go further. There's a scene I kind of described from one of my books, in the Freedom from Conscience book, in which the heroine takes out a guy who's a real bad guy in the forest, and she is nude in that. And I have actually seen art pictures in which you have a young woman who, has a bow and arrow and is like aiming at a foe. And again, you could use the same exact model for that. And, you can just add a bow and arrow, and suddenly everything changes to like this vulnerability, because psychologically when people see someone in a state of undress, it elicits a feeling of vulnerability, but also a feeling, this is kind of interesting, a feeling of protectiveness. A person feels like they must protect them. But you have the other aspect that it's almost a contradiction, in which you have a weapon and the person is displaying strength. And when you throw those together, it can create a very powerful image. And again, who's the one in charge of what image is created during this afternoon photo shoot? It's the photographer, looking through his or her eyes and seeing what they see as a feeling, capturing it through the lens, and conveying that to the people who are going to view and ultimately think about the photographs. Now, the thing is, that may be kind of an interesting way of thinking of propaganda, because again, we usually don't think of photography as propaganda, but I can name a bunch of pictures that are classics. I think of one picture in particular. It was taken years ago, and it was it looked like a starving child in Africa. I mean, the child looked like, it's hours away from death. And there's a vulture standing there waiting for that to occur. And that's a very powerful image, extremely powerful image. And you do not have to write a big, huge article about the plight of starving children for people to see exactly what is coming across. Now, I didn't say propaganda is good or bad. In fact, it actually is neutral. Propaganda, it elicits things in us. It's a form of communication, and it's often associated with trying to get you to change. So therefore, people think of manipulation there. But yeah, I think the photographer was trying to make a point and say, look, people, we need to help these people here that are starving. Again, you don't need to have an article about it. But that is what it elicited in the audiences. And that will be a classic photo for decades, maybe centuries to come. Now, let's take a look at other forms of propaganda, and keeping in mind the fact that, not the fact, the statement from Orwell that all art is ultimately propaganda. Now, let's take a look at media and, politics. The media has a very, very powerful position in society. You remember the statement, the pen is mightier than the sword. And in that, what it's trying to convey there is the idea that a person who can write an article to rally the masses can ultimately be influential in the destiny of whatever that society is. Now, the thing is that things have come a long way since the days of just regular printing press and print media. Now, still, it's very important, though. We got to remember, sometimes when we are fans of alternative media, we tend to think in the context that, everyone must be exposed to that alternative media. And it's not true. The only thing you have to do is listen to some of the, many of the people listening right now are very good at history and know a lot about politics. But all you think you have to do is listen to one of Mark Dice's videos where he's out there asking questions, I don't know, like, how do you think about Richard Nixon's race for the presidency right now? Do you think he has a chance of beating Donald Trump? And, Nixon's been dead for decades. But people on the street, they're going, I think I like Nixon better than I do Trump. Or, and he even asks questions in detail. And these people are answering like they really are experts in the field. And, think about that. Those people vote. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that those are the people that you're going to switch over and make into political scholars or something like that. Probably not for the most part. But many of your neighbors, family, and friends, and so forth, are people who really do still rely on the mainstream media. At least, to a significant degree. The average American spends 5 hours watching TV. I'll get to that in a moment. But still, that is propaganda there. And that means that you need to pay attention and try to get them to realize the truth that it is propaganda. Now, going back to the analogy that I was not to the analogy. Anyway, the thing that we need to look at here is that the biggest power that most people do not pay attention to is the fact that just like our artist who's taking pictures using a camera to convey in images and not words a feeling, the media has that same power. Now think about this for a moment. If I'm writing an article for a newspaper, let's start with newspapers, okay? Whether they be online newspapers or those that people still get in the newspaper drop box in the morning. Think about the words we can choose. Think about the fact that when I sit down, if I'm a newspaper writer, reporter, whatever, editorialist, when I sit down to create a column, I'm going to put the same care and feeling into that column as I would if I was painting a picture or taking a picture of a model in the woods. Now, I am going to craft this creation, my masterpiece, so to speak, in such a way that, if it's a newspaper, I'm going to appear non-biased. But obviously, there's no way you can be non-biased. There's just no way. And what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to, if I have the right to be able to choose pictures for the article, I can choose a picture if I'm like saying something good about Obama. Then maybe I'll choose a picture of him with his family, or speaking in front of an adoring audience, or with his dog. You know, dogs are really good in pictures because everyone relates to dogs. Most people like dogs, even if they don't have one. They like dogs. I would say about a third of people love cats to like almost an obsession. A third of people are like, yeah, cats are cute. They're nice. I like cats. I'm not going to, lose any sleep over them, but I like cats. And then there's a third that pretty much, they do not like cats at all. But there's enough people that don't like cats that, Hollywood chooses when they show a villain with a pet, it's with a cat. Okay? It's no mistake. It's not just a coincidence that villains almost always, if there's a pet to be shown, have a cat. I would choose a spider or something like that just to make a villain look bad. But ultimately, most of the cats in movies are associated with the villain. Now, I can also, if I want to show a negative side, I can take a picture that's going to show Obama looking like he's tripped up on something, or has a scowl on his face, or is exasperated, or whatever. The thing is, there's a whole bunch of ways I can make sure that the emotion that you start out with before you even read the newspaper article has already been set. And there's other things I can do, of course, to add to that, which I'll get into, but I have already set the emotion with the picture. In fact, a lot of people don't even read the article. They just look at the picture, they see the headline, and they move on. Statement made. Okay. Now, let's say we have, we know how the propaganda works against Russia within the United States now. It wasn't that way a few years ago, but now it is. And the thing is that the narrative there is not one in which I pick up one newspaper and that newspaper has a very negative portrayal of Putin. Then I pick up another newspaper and it has a positive one. No, it's uniform. Very, very, this is the way and this pretty much establishes that there is not what you would call a diversity in the media, okay? There may be a diversity in how you write your column, but the party line, okay? A lot too many people are going to say otherwise. And even if someone is saying something good about what Russia does, they always preface it with well, I'm not really a fan of Putin, but, okay? I see a lot of that. And, it's kind of ridiculous when people do that. I don't think anyone's a complete fan of anyone. Well, maybe Lindsey Graham, he might be a huge fan of John McCain and hang on every word he ever says. I don't know. But the thing is that you would expect some more diversity and you don't get it. But then you have a reinforcement that eventually grows. The more you diss on Putin or Russia, the more people get this kind of negative feeling about Russia, the more then you feel like, well, now let's take it a step further. And pretty soon it's almost like comic book demonization. All right. And so the thing is that in the wordings of your article, since now by this time now we have a picture of Putin, it looks like he's partying with Satan himself, that then we can use words that will, evoke negativity. Throw in some words like aggression, interference, heavy-handedness, and any other number of words to make Putin look bad, or whoever your adversary is in the press. And if you do that, again, you are evoking emotions. Okay, words are emotions. It's like I talk to so many people who speak several languages. I speak a couple languages, English and some really bad Swedish. It's not very good. But the one thing that all people will say is that the first language they learn, they can express certain emotions in it that they can't express in subsequent languages unless they learn those languages at a very young age. Because we learn language through emotion. It's like if I use the word mother, mother is going to be strongly attached to your own mother and feelings associated with mother. And the same would be true if I said dog. It's going to evoke feelings. It's not just a dog, it's your dog when you were 6 years old. Now, that being said, the way that you can play with words in an article, most people don't even recognize it. They're like, oh, well, he's just writing about what's going on. No. Yeah, the way you present those words is as important as the story itself that you give, and also the picture. And then we can look at the story itself. We can look at that really closely. Now, the thing is, in the media, remember, all art is propaganda, and media is too. The way we can play with that is who we select. You go to a Donald Trump rally. Find the most obnoxious person there, or with the most obnoxious sign. And if you don't like Trump, you take a picture of them and you make sure that goes out, even though there might be 20,000 other people there that look like regular everyday people. If you want to interview people, you interview most people don't understand this. They've not worked with media before. But if you go to a Trump rally, let's say, or any kind of rally for that matter, and you interview, let's say, 20 people, it's not uncommon to interview 20 people. I mean, many of you have probably been interviewed by media before. And then you're kind of like, hey, I wonder if I'm on the 6 o'clock news tonight. So you turn it on, and then they come up with the event you went to, and they don't cover you. Okay, they cover someone else. But the thing is that they select. It's just like the director when he's, thousands and thousands of hours of footage, and they piece it all together to make one message. That's the way the media works too. So therefore, they show, the bad light. If they want to really make the side they don't like look bad, they choose people to be featured that maybe are saying the same thing as someone else said, but they're saying it in such a way that really turns people off. Okay? I mean, more so than, I don't know, Hillary Clinton singing happy birthday at your birthday party or something. It's just ultimately this kind of ability to fashion the story and so you have all these, it's just like colors on a canvas. I can choose this color, this color, this color, this color, this, or this. I'll choose these three to paint my picture. Or, back to taking a picture of the model, I can choose this gal or this gal. And I can turn the entire context around. Oh, this gal has tattoos on her arm, this one doesn't. I can make a message with that. Now, the thing is, this extends also into areas such as radio. It's in newspapers, television, movies. Oh my gosh, movies have a lot of propaganda. And you may not know this, but when's the last time the Chinese saved the world from the aliens? Okay. I mean, that's a pretty, the Navy used to, I think they still do, sail a big aircraft carrier by a country just so their people can see, whoa, America means business. Ultimately a weapon is a tool of diplomacy. And the same is true for Hollywood. Hollywood can present movies. They can, turn out all kinds of media, TV series, and plant something in there. I don't know if they're doing this on purpose. To me, the number one message of shows like The Walking Dead and so forth is you should have food storage, and you should know how to take care of yourself, and you should also have friends that agree with you, in case something goes wrong. And you have all kinds of other programs. My wife was watching some show from England recently, and oh my gosh, the message the message is how horrible this guy is because I didn't catch whether it was his girlfriend or his wife had an abortion. And so he's really painted negatively for being so upset about it. And so again, the message comes across just like a lot of, again, British detective shows often that has a very negative view towards religion, because it's usually the town minister or something who's involved in something dirty. So again, what I want people to just recall, and please share it with people, let them understand that the media they see is ultimately propaganda. And that's true for all media, including what you're listening to right now. It's propaganda. But at least I encourage you to check the facts and consider for yourself whether you believe this to be true or not. And if you do find it to be true, then go out and try sharing it with others. Because ultimately, it's better to be able to crack people's faith in corporate media, get them to question it, than it is sitting there arguing until you're red in the face about why your viewpoint is better than theirs, if their viewpoint has been carefully constructed by the media. Anyway, that's about all I wanted to share with tonight. It's all the time we have. So, thanks you for tuning in, and hope you'll tune in next week to another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY-TV Productions.
Bernays was constantly marinating Freud's ideas. They both knew propaganda worked, and they loved experimenting and trying new grandiose projects. I had heard that before from someone that looked at people as animals, and they could be experimented with. George Soros, listen to this.
When you try to, let's say, improve society, you affect different people and different interests differently. So you very often have all kinds of unintended adverse consequences. So I had to experiment. That was a lot of fun, and that's actually what got me hooked on this whole enterprise.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCI.TV.